December 7, 1941, Army trucks came rolling into Fort Macon. The federal government was claiming its right to use the fort in time of need. Long said, the old fort came to life and proved its value in time of war once again. The equipment of modern warfare was installed. Soldiers bunked in the same casemates that housed both Confederate and Union troops. German U-boat submarines lurked offshore, often in sight. They systematically sunk numerous Allied tankers. Fort Macon soldiers could not directly harm the submarines, but they patrolled the beaches and manned the guns that served as a deterrent. They kept enemy ships from getting close enough to shell the Navy base or the ships in port. Shortly before the end of the war, in 1945, Fort Macon was deactivated for the last time after one final service to the defense of our country. Today, Fort Macon State Park is a monument to the efforts of the many people who lived, worked, and served their country here. As it stands here on this tip of sand, it reminds us of the tides of history that have flowed over this place. It marks both the dramatic moments and the quiet ones. The echoes of the battles of man and nature are here to be heard. All you have to do is listen. Before European settlers arrived, the only battle on this island was between the sand and the sea. Wind and waves were constantly destroying shorelines and dunes, only to rebuild them somewhere else. When the town and port of Beaufort were established by the English in the early 1700s, Beaufort was only the third town in the young colony of North Carolina. But soon England's wars with Spain and France began to have a direct impact on the English colonists in Beaufort. Spanish privateers raided the harbor. French warships lurked along the coast. In 1755, Governor Dobbs came to Beaufort and personally chose the spot for a fortification to protect the harbor.
I found a fine sandy point, well fixed to raise a head to command and secure the ship in the channel.
Governor Dobbs may have found the right spot, but the fort was never completed or manned. Built of sand and wood, it was no match for the battle it faced with nature. By 1770, it is shown on a map as Fort Dobbs in ruin. As a result, when the Revolutionary War began, the American colonists found Beaufort entirely without defense against British warships. The town leaders pleaded for assistance.
We beg leave to lay before your excellency the critical situation of this place. We every day expect a visit from the enemy.
Unfortunately, their pleas were not heeded, and the British were soon raiding the harbor and plundering Beaufort. In the years following the Revolutionary War, the United States government worked to fortify the new country's borders, and Fort Hampton was built on the same point at Beaufort Inlet. With its 8 guns, Fort Hampton protected Beaufort during the War of 1812. After the war, however, the fort was abandoned, and in 1825, a hurricane sealed its fate, washing Fort Hampton into the sea. Nature had proved to be the triumphant force in these early rounds of a never-ending battle. Beginning in 1816, a more comprehensive plan of coastal defense was devised for the country, and plans were drawn up for a much larger harbor to protect Beaufort Harbor. These plans called for a 5-sided citadel, constructed low in the ground and surrounded by a floodable ditch and a covert way with a wide earth glacis. It was an ambitious plan that would require over 10 million cubic yards of stone masonry, 9 million bricks, and 100 million cubic yards of sand and earth. The size and complexity of the task was not lost on the engineers sent to this remote outpost to build Fort Macon. Where would they get the bricks, the stone, and all the various laborers required to build the fort? How could they protect the fort from shore erosion. Work began cautiously in 1826, and problems plagued construction from the start. When they began to dig, groundwater percolated up into the foundation pits. Engineers were unhappy with local brick makers about the size and quality of the bricks they were supplying. Despite the bickering, labor shortages, storms, and shore erosion, construction continued. With the efforts of hundreds of men and boys, many of them slaves, Fort Macon rose up among the sandy dunes of Bow Banks. The walls of the citadel and covert way were the first to rise, followed by the walls and archways of the citadel's casemates. The earth was filled in above, and finally bridges, ironwork, doors, windows, shutters, and flooring were built. Fort Macon was declared complete and ready for occupation by troops in 1834. An inspection by U.S. Army engineer Captain Robert E. Lee led to more modifications, and Fort Macon finally arrived at a peak state of readiness for defense in 1846. But with no threats on our shores from abroad, the fort was left with only a single ordnance sergeant to guard and tend it. Without proper care, the harsh environment quickly took its toll on the new fort. Ironwork rusted, wood rotted, embankments blew away, shorelines eroded. Soon, Fort Macon was in no condition to defend itself or the port of Beaufort. When war finally came to Fort Macon in April 1861, it was not a war with a foreign power, but a war between the states of the North and the South. North Carolina's governor chose to side with the Confederate States, and he ordered North Carolina troops to take over all military posts in the state. A small company of North Carolina militia seized Fort Macon from its lone caretaker without incident on April 14, 1861. More state troops and volunteers were sent to help man the fort. They found the fort in sad shape and worked feverishly around the clock to prepare it for battle. Most of the young North Carolina troops had never been to war and viewed this as a great adventure that would last a few weeks.
We're not prepared for enemy yet, but if Lincoln will give us a week or 10 days, and he will send us down a lot of games, we will treat them to bloody graves.
In reality, Fort Macon was far from ready to face Union forces. Only after months of back-breaking work, much of it done by free blacks and slaves, was Fort Macon finally prepared for battle in August of 1861. But the troops found themselves without an enemy to fight. Daily drills, false alarms, frequent sightings of Union ships, and the fall of nearby forts at Hatteras Inlet kept the soldiers of Fort Macon on their toes throughout the fall and winter, but left them frustrated at being so far from the action of the war between the states. At times, they must have felt forgotten. As the new year began in 1862, it soon became clear that they were not. On January 11th, Brigadier General Ambrose Burnside set sail with a large Union force on a plan to capture the North Carolina coast from Roanoke Island to Fort Macon. The Union plan succeeded at each phase, with a quick capture of Roanoke Island, followed by the fall of New Bern and then Beaufort. Soon, the Union forces had Fort Macon surrounded and isolated from any hope of reinforcements. On March 23rd, they demanded that the fort surrender. The young Colonel Moses White, commander of the fort, politely declined. Union forces began the slow and dangerous work of hauling siege guns 4 miles down Bow Banks and building gun emplacements on the dunes west of the fort, all the while being shelled by the fort's guns.
Thursday, when we were up there, they fired 46 times at us. It didn't hurt nobody. I tell you, it made me tremble to have them shells burst over my head in the air.
skirmishes with the Confederates, the Union work progressed steadily. A month later, the Union forces were ready, and General Burnside again demanded the surrender of Fort Macon. Colonel White and his officers again resolved to fight. Even a last-minute dawn meeting on April 24th between Colonel White and General Burnside, and a plea from White's friend from West Point, Captain Herman Biggs, could not persuade the colonel to surrender. At 5:40 a.m. on April 25th, the Union forces opened fire on Fort Macon. The fort soon returned fire, and for hours the battle raged. Union gunboats tried to join in the fight, but rough seas and damage from the fort's guns turned them away. At first, the Union guns were missing the target. Soldiers in a Union signal station in Beaufort were able to see the error and signal the batteries. By 11 a.m., the Union shells were on target, and the fort's guns and walls began to take a terrible beating. Despite the best efforts of the Confederates, the superior accuracy and power of the Union's rifled cannons soon took their toll. The Union guns were targeting the powder magazines, and by mid-afternoon, the walls of the fort beside the main powder magazine were so weakened that Colonel White faced the very real danger that another hit would cause the magazine to explode, destroying the fort and possibly everyone in it.
2 more days of such fire would have reduced the whole to a mere mass of ruins.
At 4:30 p.m., a white flag was raised over the fort, and on the following morning of April 26th, Fort Macon was surrendered to Union forces. The fort had received 560 hits from Union guns. The walls were pocked, and the guns in their carriages were shattered. On one staircase were the marks of a cannonball that nicked each step as it fell into the fort. The Union casualties included 1 man killed and 3 wounded. Confederates lost 7 men and had 18 wounded. While the battle itself lasted only 11 hours, the fort had held Union forces at bay for a month. Fort Macon was never designed to stand alone against an enemy, but to be part of a defense with naval forces and reinforcements by land. With no such support, it seems that Fort Macon did as well as could be expected of it in the face of far superior numbers and far superior weapons. During the remaining years of the war between the states, Union forces occupied the fort, and it was used primarily as a military prison. After the war ended in 1865, Fort Macon became a typical military post centered around the fort and its duty as a prison. With no war raging, officers and soldiers had their families with them, and daily life at the fort included children going to school. The post grew to have a number of buildings outside the fort. Even so, Mrs. Jeannie Cowes, the wife of the assistant surgeon, Elliot Cowes, found life at the fort trying at times.
My dear sister, I suppose this is as pleasant as most forts, and I ought to like it. But every sunset and sunrise, the cannon over my casemate is fired. It is very healthy here, and has nice places for Edith to play. We frequently go out on excursions. Edith is fast being spoiled. Several of the officers keep a private paper of candy for her, and she trots around to the different rooms and asks for a tan-tan every morning as soon as she is dressed.
While stationed at Fort Macon, Dr. Cowes found ample time between his duties to pursue his interest in nature. The fort's location on the isolated barrier island with its dunes, marshes, beaches, and maritime forests provided a rich variety of bird, insect, and fish life for him to explore.
My dear professor, I have a deuce lot of jackdaws and Wilson's plover. But birds so far have been the smallest part of my collections. How are you off for sharks? They are so thick around here, we caught 6 big fellows from Salem yesterday.
With the exception of the occasional prisoner escape or visit by a hurricane, life at Fort Macon was peaceful, though perhaps a bit boring for the average soldier. Things got even quieter when the fort was deactivated in in 1877 and once again left in the hands of a single caretaker. Activity returned briefly to Fort Macon during the Spanish-American War in 1898, when the fort was occupied by the 3rd North Carolina Volunteers, a regiment consisting entirely of black officers and enlisted men. The regimental commander, Colonel James H. Young, is believed to be the first black officer to command a U.S. military post. Following this brief war, the fort remained empty until it was formally closed on Christmas Day in 1903. By then, it was already being reclaimed by nature. Fort Macon remained abandoned for the first quarter of the 20th century. Time and climate took its toll. Vandals broke windows and stole anything they could find and pry loose. The First World War came and went, with no arrival of troops and no preparations for battle. In 1923, the federal government determined that Fort Macon no longer had strategic military value. The following year, the state of North Carolina acquired the fort and the property surrounding it to use as a public park. The U.S. government, however, reserved the right to reoccupy the fort and the land if the national interest required it. The state was delighted to have this historic site and planned to make Fort Macon into a state park, its second after Mount Mitchell. The arrival of the Great Depression brought the Civilian Conservation Corps to Fort Macon. They cleared out the fort and the grounds, restored the fort, and built roads and public facilities. This work allowed Fort Macon State Park to open on May 1st, 1936, as North Carolina's first functioning state park. The new park was enjoyed by many, but within a few short years, shore erosion had destroyed much of the beach and some of the park's newly built facilities. While Fort Macon battled its old enemy, the sea, it was a threat on the other side of the globe that would end Fort Macon's first brief stint as a state park.